Mother Bear, Howls at a Funeral. The deceased family's infant brought everyone to tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The small cemetery of Pinewood Valley lay shrouded in morning mist, silent except for the soft whispers of mourners gathering around a freshly dug grave. Rain threatened from gray clouds that hung low over the treetops of the dense forest bordering the cemetery's eastern edge. The air felt heavy, not just with moisture but with grief that seemed to press down on every shoulder present. Olivia Reed clutched her 6-month-old daughter, Melody, closer to her chest as she stood beside the polished oak coffin that contained the body of her brother, Nathan. The infant, dressed in a soft cream dress that Nathan had bought for her just weeks before his accident, cooed softly against her mother's neck, oblivious to the sorrow surrounding her. "He loved her so much," whispered Eleanor, Nathan's widow, her voice cracking as she reached out to touch Melody's tiny hand. She was the light of his life. The small gathering of mourners, no more than 20 people from the valley, stood in a loose semicircle around the grave. Pastor William cleared his throat, his weathered Bible open in his hands, ready to begin the service. The forest behind them remained unusually still, as if the wild creatures that called it home were paying their respects as well. As the pastor began to speak, his words carried on the damp air. Olivia noticed movement at the tree line. At first, she thought it was just the wind disturbing the branches, but then she saw it clearly. A massive brown form moving through the underbrush, followed by a smaller version of itself. "Bears," she whispered, her arms tightening protectively around Melody. The mother bear emerged partially from the forest, standing tall on her hind legs at the cemetery's edge, her cub hiding behind her massive form. Instead of retreating or charging, the bear did something that sent chills down every spine present. She opened her mouth and let out a mournful howl that cut through the pastor's words like a knife. Melody, who had been quietly resting against her mother's shoulder, suddenly stirred. Her tiny head lifted, and to Olivia's astonishment the baby turned toward the sound, her bright eyes widening with interest rather than fear. The mourners froze, caught between the solemnity of the funeral and the unexpected intrusion of wilderness. Some reached for whatever might serve as weapons, umbrellas, heavy flower arrangements, while others simply stood paralyzed. "Don't move," whispered Samuel Thorne, the local wildlife officer who had come to pay his respects. "Something's not right with this. Bears don't typically behave this way." The mother bear continued to howl, a sound so filled with what could only be described as sorrow that several mourners found tears springing to their eyes, triggered not by fear, but by a strange recognition of shared grief. And then, as if responding to a call that only she could hear, Melody began to babble excitedly, her small hands reaching toward the bear, straining against Olivia's protective embrace. The connection between the grieving animal and the innocent child was palpable, hanging in the air like the mist that swirled around their feet. It was as if Melody understood something about the bear's presence that the adults, with their fears and preconceptions, could not comprehend. Pastor William had fallen silent, his eulogy forgotten as he, along with everyone else, stared transfixed at the unfolding scene. The boundary between civilization and wilderness, between human grief and animal instinct, seemed to blur before their eyes. What brought this mother bear to howl at Nathan Reed's funeral? Why was baby Melody reaching toward the dangerous creature with such innocent joy? And what connection could possibly exist between the deceased man and the wild bears that lived in the forest he had loved so much? As the mother bear's howls filled the cemetery, Eleanor stepped forward, her grief momentarily overshadowed by a strange recognition. Her hand trembled as she raised it to her mouth. "It's her," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the bear's cries. "Olivia, it's the bear Nathan saved." Olivia stared at her sister-in-law in confusion, Melody still squirming in her arms, desperate to get closer to the grieving animal. "What are you talking about?" The rain began to fall, gentle at first, droplets catching in Melody's wispy hair like tiny diamonds. Eleanor's eyes never left the bear as she spoke, memories flooding back through her tears. Last spring, Nathan found a bear cub caught in an illegal trap deep in the forest. He freed it, even though the mother was nearby watching him. He risked his life to save her baby. Eleanor's voice broke. He came home with his hands bleeding from the metal trap, but so happy that he'd managed to help. Samuel Thorne moved slowly to stand beside them, his experienced eyes assessing the situation. "Bears have incredible memories," he said quietly, "and the bond between a mother and her cub is one of the strongest in nature. If Nathan saved her cub, she might indeed remember him." The bear lowered herself to all fours, her massive head hanging low as if in deference. The cub, now visible beside her, took a hesitant step toward the cemetery fence, its curious eyes fixed on the gathering. "Look at the cub's right front paw," Samuel pointed discreetly. "There's scarring there that could very well be from a trap injury." Melody's babbling grew more insistent, her tiny body lurching forward with such determination that Olivia struggled to hold her. The baby's face lit up with a smile so pure, so innocent, that several mourners gasped. "Nathan always said Melody had a special way with animals," Eleanor murmured, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek. "He called her his little forest sprite." Pastor William, recovering from his initial shock, placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully, "this is Nathan's way of saying goodbye, through the creatures he protected and the child he adored." The mother bear let out another howl, softer now but no less heart-wrenching. The sound reverberated through the small valley, echoing off the mountains that embraced Pinewood like protective arms. Olivia felt torn between maternal instinct urging her to protect her child and a growing sense that something profound was unfolding, something beyond human understanding. Melody continued to reach toward the bears, her innocent face alight with wonder. "What should we do?" Olivia whispered, looking between Samuel and Eleanor. Samuel kept his eyes on the bears, his expression thoughtful. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife management. These bears aren't acting aggressively. They seem respectful, if that's possible." Eleanor wiped tears from her face, leaving streaks in the light makeup she'd carefully applied that morning. "Nathan wouldn't want us to fear them. He believed in coexistence, in respect for all living things." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It's why he went into the forest that day, to check on the rehabilitation areas he'd established. It's why he died there, too." The unspoken truth hung between them. Nathan had died alone in the forest he loved, his truck veering off a rain-slicked road into a ravine. By the time search teams found him, it was too late. Now, standing before his coffin, it seemed the forest had come to mourn him. Melody let out a sound that was almost a laugh, her chubby fingers stretching toward the bears. The cub responded with a soft whimper, taking another tentative step forward before its mother gently nudged it back. "I think," said Pastor William softly, his Bible clutched to his chest, "we should continue the service. If these creatures wish to pay their respects, who are we to deny them?" The rain fell steadily now, soaking into the earth that would soon embrace Nathan's body. But no one moved to seek shelter. Instead, they stood witness to this extraordinary moment, a bridge between worlds that Nathan had somehow created through his compassion. The funeral resumed, though nothing about it could be called ordinary anymore. Pastor William's voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the rain, speaking of life's mysteries and the connections that bind all living things. The mother bear and her cub remained at the forest's edge, silent now but watchful, as if they understood the solemnity of the human ritual unfolding before them. Melody had quieted in Olivia's arms, her bright eyes still fixed on the bears, occasionally letting out soft coos that seemed to travel across the cemetery straight to the listening animals. The rain continued to fall, but no one suggested postponing the service or moving indoors. There was a sense that this moment, this convergence of worlds, was too important to interrupt. As the pastor invited mourners to share their memories of Nathan, Doctor, Amara Chen, the local veterinarian, stepped forward. Her dark hair was plastered to her face from the rain, but she paid it no mind as she looked from the bears to the mourners with understanding dawning in her eyes. Nathan brought a bear cub to my clinic last spring, she confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotion clouding her features. It was badly injured from a trap, just as Eleanor said. We worked together for hours to save its paw. She gestured toward the cub now standing beside its mother. I believe that's the same cub. The markings on its face match my records. A murmur went through the small crowd. Samuel Thorne nodded, his earlier suspicions confirmed. Nathan stayed with that cub all night, Dr. Chen continued, her eyes now filling with tears. He talked to it, sang to it, even though I told him it was risky. He said that everything deserves compassion, especially when it's scared and in pain. Eleanor stepped forward then, drawing strength from these memories of her husband's kindness. Nathan went back to check on them every few weeks, she said. He would take photographs from a distance, never interfering, just making sure they were doing well. Her voice caught. He showed me the pictures. The cub was growing stronger each time. He was so proud. As if understanding that they were the subject of conversation, the mother bear shifted, moving slightly closer to the cemetery fence. The mourners tensed collectively, but Samuel raised a hand, signaling them to remain calm. She's not threatening, he assured them. Bears don't typically attend human gatherings, but there's nothing aggressive about her posture. The bear looked directly at Eleanor then, and the raw emotion in the animal's dark eyes made several people gasp. There was intelligence there, and something more, a shared understanding of loss that transcended species. Olivia felt Melody squirm in her arms again, more insistently now. Acting on instinct she couldn't explain, she took a tentative step toward the fence, closing the distance between her daughter and the bears. Eleanor moved with her, a protective hand on Olivia's arm. "Are you sure?" Eleanor whispered, though her eyes held no judgment. Olivia nodded, something deep within her trusting that this was right. "Nathan would want this," she said softly. He believed Melody had a special connection to the natural world. He used to say she was born with an open heart, able to see things adults had forgotten how to see. They stopped a few feet from the fence, close enough that they could hear the mother bear's heavy breathing. Melody reached out, her tiny hand extended toward the massive creature that could end her life with a single swipe. "Nathan's blood runs in her veins," Eleanor said quietly. "His kindness lives in her. Perhaps the bear senses that." The mother bear lowered her head, her eyes level with Melody's. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, they regarded each other, the infant with joyous curiosity, the bear with ancient wisdom. Then, in a gesture that would be recounted in Pinewood Valley for generations to come, the mother bear let out a soft, rumbling sound that was almost a purr. Melody laughed in response, a sound so pure and untainted by sorrow that it cut through the gloom of the day like a shaft of sunlight. The cub, emboldened by its mother's calm, approached the fence, its nose twitching with interest. From the edge of the gathering, Mrs. Abernathy, the oldest resident of Pinewood Valley, spoke up. Her voice, though wavering with age, carried clearly. "In all my 87 years, I've never seen such a thing. But my grandmother used to tell stories." She paused, looking around at the skeptical faces. Stories about the special bond between this valley and its creatures, about how the mountain keeps its own balance. Pastor William, his Bible now protected under his coat, nodded encouragingly. "Go on, Florence." She said that when someone who truly belongs to the mountain passes, the creatures come to guide their spirit home. Mrs. Abernathy's rheumy eyes shone with conviction. My grandmother wasn't given to flights of fancy. She believed it because she'd seen it, just as we're seeing it now. As if to punctuate the old woman's words, the rain suddenly eased, and a beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating Nathan's coffin, Melody's upturned face, and the bears standing vigil at the forest's edge. The sun's appearance felt like a blessing, a silent endorsement of the unusual communion taking place in the cemetery. Water droplets on leaves and gravestones caught the light, transforming the somber setting into something almost magical. Melody gurgled happily, her attention divided now between the bears and the dancing light. "I have something to show you all," Eleanor said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been all day. She reached into the pocket of her black coat and pulled out a small, worn leather journal. This was Nathan's. He kept records of all his encounters in the forest. Her fingers trembled as she opened it to a marked page. "I found this entry from last spring, after he saved the cub." She began to read, her voice carrying clearly in the newly still air. April 18th. The mother watched me the entire time I worked to free her cub. She could have charged at any moment, but somehow she knew I was trying to help. When the cub was finally free, she made a sound I've never heard before. Not a growl or a roar, but almost like a song. The cub limped back to her, its paw bleeding but salvageable. They disappeared into the trees, but I felt something pass between us. An understanding. Melody would say we made a friend today. Eleanor looked up, tears streaming down her face. "He wrote about you, little one," she said to Melody, who was watching her aunt with wide, attentive eyes. "He saw the world through your innocent perspective." Dr. Chen nodded, adding context to Nathan's words. The trap had nearly severed the cub's paw. If Nathan hadn't found it when he did, the cub would have died, or worse, been left permanently maimed. Bears with injuries like that rarely survive in the wild. The mother bear, as if understanding the conversation, shifted her weight. The movement caused several mourners to step back instinctively, but the bear made no move to approach further. Instead, she lowered herself to a sitting position, her cub nestling against her side. Samuel Thorne shook his head in wonder. "I've tracked and studied bears for most of my career, and I've never seen behavior like this. They're actually participating in the funeral." Old Mrs. Abernathy nodded firmly. "As I said, the mountain keeps its own balance. Nathan gave life back to the forest. Now the forest comes to honor him." Pastor William, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Perhaps there's a lesson for us here, about the connections that exist beyond our understanding, about how a single act of compassion can ripple outward in ways we could never predict." Eleanor turned more pages in Nathan's journal, her fingers caressing his handwriting. He visited them several times after that day. Listen to this entry from 3 weeks later. The cub's paw is healing well. I kept my distance, but they knew I was there. The mother actually led the cub to the clearing's edge, as if she wanted me to see their progress. I left them the berries I'd gathered. When I returned the next day, they were gone. She looked up, fresh wonder in her tear-stained face. And here, from just a month ago, saw the bear family again today. The cub is growing strong, no sign of a limp. The mother looked right at me, and I swear she recognized me. I told them about Melody, how much she's growing too, how I can't wait to show her all the wonders of this forest when she's older. The last words hung in the air, a painful reminder of the future that had been stolen from Nathan, from Eleanor, from little Melody. The brief reprieve from grief evaporated, and Eleanor's shoulders began to shake with fresh sobs. Olivia shifted Melody to one arm and wrapped the other around Eleanor's shoulders. "He'll still show her," she whispered fiercely. "Through us, through the stories we'll tell her, through days spent in this forest, he loved so much." The mother bear rose then, moving with surprising grace for such a massive creature. She approached the fence, stopping just on the other side. The mourners held their collective breath. Even Samuel, with all his experience, tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But what happened next defied all expectation. The mother bear lowered her head to the ground in what could only be described as a bow. She held the position for several heartbeats, then raised her head and looked directly at the small coffin that held Nathan's body. Melody squirmed in Olivia's arms, reaching out with such determination that Olivia felt compelled to take another step forward. They were now directly across from the bear, separated only by the low fence of the cemetery. "Careful," Samuel cautioned, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he couldn't deny the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. The mother bear turned her gaze from the coffin to Melody, their eyes meeting across the boundary between wilderness and civilization. The cub, emboldened by its mother's calm, approached the fence and rose up on its hind legs, its curious face now at the same height as Melody's. For a moment, child and cub regarded each other with mirrored curiosity, two young lives untouched by the prejudices and fears that often separated their kinds. Eleanor's hand tightened on Nathan's journal. "He would have loved this," she whispered. "It's everything he believed in." The remarkable standoff continued in silence, neither human nor bear willing to break the fragile connection that had formed. Melody's tiny hand remained outstretched toward the bear cub, who had settled into a sitting position just beyond the fence, its bright eyes fixed on the infant with unmistakable interest. Pastor William cleared his throat gently. "We should continue with the service," he said, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. "How does one proceed with a traditional funeral when nature itself seems to be conducting its own ritual of farewell?" Eleanor nodded, tucking Nathan's journal carefully back into her coat pocket. "Yes," she agreed. "Nathan wouldn't want his passing to be only about grief. He lived for moments of wonder like this." The pastor resumed his position beside the coffin, his weathered Bible reopened to the passage he had selected. As he began to speak words of comfort and hope, the mother bear and her cub remained motionless, as attentive as any of the human mourners. "Nathan Reed lived in harmony with this valley and its creatures," Pastor William said, departing from his prepared eulogy to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances. His life was a testament to the belief that compassion knows no boundaries, that kindness extended to the smallest creature is never wasted. Olivia felt Melody grow heavy in her arms as the baby's excitement gave way to the tiredness that had been building all morning. The infant's eyelids drooped, though she fought to keep her gaze on the bears. As if sensing the child's fatigue, the mother bear made a soft chuffing sound. The cub, responding to its mother's signal, backed away from the fence, though it seemed reluctant to break its visual connection with Melody. Eleanor stepped forward then, her grief momentarily overshadowed by the need to honor what was happening. "Thank you," she said directly to the mother bear, her voice clear and steady despite the tears that continued to stream down her face. "Thank you for coming to say goodbye to him." The mother bear's response was a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath their feet. Samuel Thorne shook his head in amazement. "Bears communicate through a complex system of vocalizations," he said quietly, "but this goes beyond my understanding." Old Mrs. Abernathy nodded sagely. "Not everything in these mountains can be explained by science, young man." The burial proceeded, the coffin being lowered into the earth as Pastor William spoke of dust returning to dust and spirit returning to God. Throughout the solemn process, the bears remained at the forest's edge, sentinel-like in their watchfulness. When it came time for the mourners to place handfuls of soil into the grave, Eleanor went first, her fingers releasing the earth with reluctant finality. Olivia followed, balancing Melody carefully as she bent to take a small portion of soil. To everyone's surprise, Melody, who had been drifting toward sleep, suddenly became alert again. She reached down, her small fingers grasping at the loose earth beside the grave. Olivia, understanding her daughter's intent, helped her take a tiny handful. Together, they stood at the edge of the grave, Melody's soil-filled fist extended over the coffin below. With a little assistance from her mother, Melody opened her hand, releasing the earth. It fell with a soft patter onto the polished wood, a child's first understanding of the cycle of life and death. As if in response, the mother bear rose on her hind legs again, her massive form silhouetted against the forest behind her. She let out one final howl, not mournful this time, but strong and clear, a sound that seemed to reach beyond the valley and into the mountains themselves. The cub joined its mother, adding its higher-pitched voice to create an unlikely duet that sent shivers through every person present. Birds that had been silent suddenly took flight from the trees, their calls joining the bear's song. "A final salute," Samuel whispered, awe evident in his voice, from one guardian of the forest to another. When the sound faded, the mother bear dropped back to all fours and, with one last look at the gathered humans, turned and began to make her way back into the depths of the forest. The cub lingered a moment longer, its gaze fixed on Melody before following its mother. As the bears disappeared among the trees, Melody let out a soft sigh and nestled her head against Olivia's shoulder, her eyes finally closing in sleep. The spell that had held the mourners transfixed seemed to lift, allowing grief to flow freely once more. Eleanor stood staring at the spot where the bears had been, Nathan's journal clutched tightly in her hand. "He told me once," she said to no one in particular, "that when he died, he wanted his spirit to remain in these forests forever." A sad smile touched her lips. "I think he may have gotten his wish." Pastor William closed his Bible, looking thoughtfully at the forest's edge. "In all my years of ministry, I've presided over hundreds of funerals, but never have I witnessed such a clear affirmation that death is not the end of our connections, to each other, to this earth, or to the creatures with whom we share it." The mourners began to disperse slowly, heading back toward their cars for the reception that would follow at Eleanor's home. But many paused to look back at the forest's edge, as if hoping for one more glimpse of the bears who had made this farewell unlike any other. Olivia lingered with Eleanor beside the grave. Melody sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Do you think," Olivia asked hesitantly, "that she'll remember this when she's older?" Eleanor reached out to stroke Melody's soft cheek. "Probably not in her conscious mind," she said. "But somewhere deeper? Yes, I believe she will. Nathan's connection to this place, to its creatures, that lives in her. Today proved it." As they finally turned to leave, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the forest, carrying with it the distant sound of a bear's call echoing through the valley. No longer mournful, but wild and free. The days following Nathan's funeral passed in a blur of casseroles, condolence cards, and quiet conversations that inevitably circled back to the bear's extraordinary appearance. Word spread quickly through Pinewood Valley, and soon the small community could speak of little else. Some dismissed it as coincidence, a curious bear and her cub happening upon a human gathering. Others, particularly those who had witnessed it firsthand, knew they had seen something profound, something that defied rational explanation. Eleanor spent those days moving through her grief like a woman under water, going through the motions of thanking visitors and sorting through Nathan's belongings, all while feeling disconnected from the world around her. The only times she felt truly present were when she read from Nathan's journals, or when Melody was brought to visit. 1 week after the funeral, Olivia arrived at Eleanor's cabin with Melody bundled against the autumn chill. The baby had been unusually fussy since the funeral, as if she too was mourning in her own way. "I thought we might walk to the memorial tree you planted," Olivia suggested gently. "The fresh air might do us all good." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the suggestion. Nathan's memorial tree, a young red maple, had been planted at the edge of their property, where the maintained lawn gave way to the wilder forest he had loved. They walked in companionable silence, Melody alert in her mother's arms, her eyes wide as she took in the colorful canopy above them. The maple leaves had begun to turn, creating a fiery contrast against the evergreens beyond. "I've been reading more of Nathan's journals," Eleanor said finally, as they approached the small tree with its circle of freshly turned earth. "Did you know he'd been documenting that bear family for almost a year before he found the cub in the trap?" Olivia shook her head, bouncing Melody gently as the baby began to fuss again. "He first encountered them last winter," Eleanor continued, kneeling to straighten the small stone marker at the base of the tree. "The mother was unusually tolerant of his presence. He wrote that he felt she was different from other bears he'd observed. More curious about humans, less inclined to flee. Samuel Thorne said that's unusual," Olivia remarked. "Bears typically avoid human contact whenever possible." Eleanor nodded, running her fingers over the inscription on the stone. "Nathan Reed. His spirit lives in these woods." She took a deep breath before continuing. The last entry in his journal was written the morning of the accident. He wrote that he'd spotted the bear family near Miller's Creek and was planning to check on them. Her voice caught. That's where he was heading when his truck went off the road. Melody suddenly let out a high-pitched squeal, her little body twisting in Olivia's arms, as she pointed insistently toward the forest edge beyond the memorial tree. Both women froze, their eyes following the direction of Melody's outstretched hand. There, partially concealed by a stand of pine trees, stood the mother bear. Alone this time, without her cub, she watched them with that same intelligent gaze that had so unnerved and moved the funeral attendees. "She followed us home," Eleanor whispered, not daring to move. Olivia clutched Melody tighter, instinctively stepping closer to Eleanor. "Is that even possible? We're miles from the cemetery." But the bear's focused attention left little doubt that her presence was deliberate. She took a few steps forward, emerging fully from the trees, then stopped, as if respecting an invisible boundary. Melody's fussing ceased immediately. Instead, she cooed softly, her eyes locked on the massive creature before them. The sound carried in the still autumn air, and the bear's ears twitched in response. She's been watching the house, Eleanor realized suddenly. Nathan wrote about Bear's incredible sense of smell and memory for locations. She must have tracked his scent here over time. The bear moved again, making both women tense, but instead of approaching, she lowered her head to the ground, nudging something forward with her nose. It rolled across the fallen leaves, coming to rest a few feet away from the memorial tree. "What is that?" Olivia whispered, squinting to make out the object in the dappled forest light. Eleanor, driven by curiosity that momentarily overcame her caution, took a few steps forward. It's a pine cone," she said, her voice filled with confusion. But not just any pine cone. As Eleanor looked more closely, she gasped, "Olivia, look at this!" Olivia moved to her side, still holding Melody securely. The pine cone was unusually large and perfectly formed. Its scales opened to reveal the seeds within. But what made it remarkable was the small scrap of cloth tangled in its scales, a piece of faded red flannel. "That's—" Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "That's from Nathan's old shirt, the one he wore when he was working in the forest. I cut it up for rags months ago." The bear remained motionless, watching as Eleanor carefully picked up the pine cone. The scrap of flannel was unmistakably from Nathan's shirt. Olivia recognized the pattern immediately. "How is this possible?" Olivia whispered. "How could she have found this and known to bring it here?" Eleanor held the pine cone as if it were the most precious gift, tears streaming down her face. "He always said they were more intelligent than we give them credit for, more connected to the world around them." She looked up at the bear, who was still watching them intently. "Thank you," she said simply. The bear made a soft huffing sound, then turned her massive head to look at Melody. The baby had grown still in her mother's arms, her wide eyes fixed on the bear with the same fascination she had shown at the funeral. "I think she wants to see Melody," Eleanor said quietly. Olivia hesitated, every maternal instinct warning against bringing her child closer to a wild predator. And yet, the bear had shown no aggression, only a strange sort of reverence. "I'll hold her," Eleanor offered, setting the pine cone carefully on the memorial stone. "You can stay back if you're uncomfortable." After a moment's consideration, Olivia nodded, passing Melody carefully to Eleanor. "Be careful," she cautioned, though the warning felt almost unnecessary in the face of the bear's calm demeanor. Eleanor cradled Melody in her arms, taking a few steps forward until they were standing just beside the memorial tree. The bear watched them approach, her posture relaxed yet attentive. "This is Nathan's niece," Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the strangeness of addressing a wild animal as if it could understand. "This is Melody." As if in response to her name, Melody babbled happily, reaching out toward the bear with the same fearless curiosity she had shown at the funeral. The bear lowered her head slightly, nostrils flaring, as she caught the baby's scent on the breeze. For several heartbeats they remained like that. Woman, child, and bear, connected by the memory of a man who had bridged their worlds. Then, with a grace that belied her size, the bear backed away, never turning her back on them as she retreated into the shelter of the trees. Just before she disappeared from view, she paused, looking back one last time at the memorial tree with its small stone marker and the pine cone resting upon it. Then, with a soft huff that almost sounded like a sigh, she vanished into the depths of the forest. The first snow of winter came early to Pinewood Valley, transforming the forest into a hushed wonderland of white. 3 months had passed since Nathan's funeral, and while grief still hung heavy in Eleanor's cabin, it had begun to take on new dimensions, less sharp at the edges, more woven into the fabric of daily life. Olivia visited often, bringing Melody, who grew more alert and engaged with each passing week. The baby was sitting up on her own now, babbling in earnest conversations with anyone who would listen, her personality emerging like a butterfly from its chrysalis. On this particular December afternoon, Olivia arrived to find Eleanor on the porch, wrapped in one of Nathan's old sweaters, staring out at the snow-covered trees. "I was just thinking about Christmas," Eleanor said as Olivia settled beside her, Melody bundled in a thick, hand-knitted blanket. It was Nathan's favorite holiday. He loved everything about it. The lights, the music, the way the whole valley came together. Olivia nodded, remembering her brother's childlike enthusiasm for the season. "We'll make it special," she promised. "Different, but special." Eleanor smiled, though her eyes remained sad. "I've been putting up a few decorations. Not as many as he would have, but—" She trailed off, then visibly gathered herself. "I have something to show you. Both of you." She led them inside, where a small fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of cinnamon hung in the air. In one corner, a modest Christmas tree stood, decorated with simple white lights and what appeared to be hand-carved wooden ornaments. "Did you make these?" Olivia asked, moving closer to examine the delicate figures. Birds, deer, small woodland creatures, each rendered with remarkable detail. Eleanor shook her head. "They were Nathan's. Another hobby I didn't know about until I found these in his workshop last week." She reached out to touch one, a tiny bear cub, its wooden form captured in a playful pose. "But that's not what I wanted to show you." She crossed to a bookshelf and returned with a small leather-bound package. "I've been working on this since the funeral. It's for Melody when she's older." Olivia unwrapped the leather to reveal a book, hand-bound with careful stitches. The cover bore a simple title, "The Bear Who Came to Say Goodbye." "Oh, Eleanor," Olivia whispered, her fingers tracing the embossed title. "This is beautiful." "Open it," Eleanor urged, her eyes brightening with purpose for the first time in months. Olivia settled onto the couch with Melody in her lap and carefully opened the handmade book. Inside, Eleanor had combined her own illustrations with photographs Nathan had taken, creating a children's story about a forest ranger who saved a bear cub and the mother bear who never forgot his kindness. The final pages depicted the funeral scene, rendered with surprising gentleness. The mother bear howling her grief, the baby reaching out in innocent recognition. "I want her to know what happened," Eleanor said, watching as Melody's small hand patted the colorful pages. "Not just the sadness of losing Nathan, but the wonder of that day, the connection we witnessed." Olivia wiped away tears that had formed in the corners of her eyes. "It's perfect. She'll treasure this when she's old enough to understand." Eleanor nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "There's something else. Something I haven't told anyone." She moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "I've seen the bear 3 more times since that day at the memorial tree." Olivia's eyebrows shot up in surprise. 3 times? Where? "Always at the edge of the property, always at dusk." Eleanor's voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Always on days when I've been at my lowest." It's as if she knows somehow. Melody babbled suddenly, an excited string of sounds that drew both women's attention. The baby was pointing at the window, her chubby face alight with excitement. Olivia followed her daughter's gaze, and her heart nearly stopped. There, at the tree line just beyond Eleanor's garden, stood the mother bear. Even from this distance, they could see the steam of her breath in the cold air. "There she is again," Eleanor said quietly, right on cue. "How is that possible?" Olivia breathed, instinctively holding Melody closer. "Can she really sense when you're struggling?" Eleanor shook her head, wonder mixing with the grief in her eyes. "I don't know. But Nathan always said animals perceive things we can't comprehend, especially bears. He thought they were far more intelligent than science has recognized." The bear remained at the forest's edge, watching the cabin with that same thoughtful gaze they had come to recognize. This time, however, something was different. "Look," Olivia said suddenly. "She's not alone." Sure enough, the bear cub appeared from behind its mother, larger than it had been at the funeral but still unmistakably immature. And beside them, partially hidden by a snow-dusted pine, stood a third bear, another cub, smaller than the first. "A new cub," Eleanor whispered. "She has another baby." The sight caught at something deep in Olivia's chest, the continuity of life, even in the face of loss. The mother bear who had mourned with them had created new life, extending her family just as Nathan's legacy lived on through Melody. "Should we go outside?" Olivia asked, surprising herself with the suggestion. Eleanor considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Let me get my coat." Minutes later, they stood on the back porch, bundled against the cold. Melody was wrapped in multiple layers, only her bright eyes visible as she peered out from her mother's protective embrace. The bear family remained at the forest's edge, watching their approach with alert but unthreatened postures. "Hello, old friend," Eleanor called softly, her breath clouding in the winter air. The mother bear huffed in response, shaking snow from her thick fur. The first cub, now nearly adolescent, stayed close to its mother's side. But the new cub, curious and bold, took a few tentative steps forward before its mother gently nudged it back with her nose. "Look how they've grown," Olivia said, bouncing Melody gently as the baby strained to see better. "Do you think they'll stay in this territory?" "Nathan said this valley has been unusually good for bears in recent years," Eleanor replied. "Less hunting pressure, more protected habitat. He was working with the Conservation Service to establish more sanctuaries." A shadow crossed her face. "That work's stalled since he died." Melody let out an insistent sound, pushing against her mother's protective hold. The noise caught the attention of all three bears, their heads swiveling in unison to focus on the small human. What happened next would be debated by wildlife experts and local storytellers for years to come. The mother bear lowered herself to the ground, pressing her massive belly against the snow. Then, in a posture more reminiscent of a playful dog than a wild predator, she pushed herself forward on her front paws, sliding several feet through the powdery snow toward them. The cubs watched their mother for a moment, then imitated her action, creating small avalanches of snow as they slid playfully down the gentle slope that led from forest to garden. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They're playing," she said, incredulity coloring her voice. "They're actually playing with us." Indeed, the bears repeated the sliding motion, coming slightly closer each time before retreating back to the safety of the tree line. It was a game, a cautious invitation to share joy across the species barrier. Melody, delighted by the display, clapped her mittened hands together and let out a peal of laughter that rang through the quiet winter landscape. The sound seemed to encourage the bears, particularly the new cub, who rolled enthusiastically in the snow before scrambling back to its mother's side. Nathan would have given anything to see this, Eleanor whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. As if in answer to her words, a flash of movement caught their attention. Something small and dark against the white snow, moving rapidly from the forest toward the house. Before either woman could react, a raven landed on the porch railing beside them, its glossy feathers iridescent in the winter light. "What in the world?" Olivia breathed, taking a step back. The raven cocked its head, studying them with one bright eye, then let out a harsh caw that echoed in the still air. To their astonishment, the bird hopped along the railing until it was directly in front of Eleanor, then dropped something from its beak. The object landed with a soft thud on the wooden porch. Eleanor bent to pick it up, her hands trembling slightly. "It's Nathan's wedding ring," she said, her voice barely audible. "The one he was wearing when—" She couldn't finish the sentence, staring at the simple gold band resting in her palm. Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "That's impossible," she said slowly. "He was wearing that when they buried him." Eleanor nodded, her face pale. "I know. I specifically asked them not to remove it." The raven watched them, its head tilting as if gauging their reaction. Then, with another harsh cry, it launched itself from the railing and flew directly toward the bear family. To the women's amazement, the bird landed on the mother bear's broad back, settling there as comfortably as if on a fence post. "Eleanor," Olivia said carefully, "what's happening here?" Eleanor shook her head, her fingers closing tightly around the ring. "I don't know, but Nathan used to talk about the ravens in these mountains. He said they were like messengers, collecting shiny objects, watching everything that happened in the forest." The mother bear rose to her full height then, the raven still perched on her back. She looked directly at Eleanor, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words or human comprehension. "Thank you," Eleanor called, holding up the ring so it caught the winter sunlight. The bear huffed once more, then turned and disappeared into the forest, her cubs following closely behind. The raven remained just long enough to let out one final call before taking flight, its dark form vanishing among the snow-laden branches. For several minutes after the animals departed, Eleanor and Olivia stood in stunned silence, the only sound Melody's contented babbling as she played with the zipper of her mother's coat. "We should go inside," Olivia finally said, noticing how the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon. "It's getting colder." Eleanor nodded, but made no move to return to the cabin. Instead, she held Nathan's ring up to the fading light, examining it as if searching for answers in its gleaming surface. "How did the raven get this, Eleanor?" Olivia asked, the practical question breaking through her wonder. "Rings don't just leave their owners." Eleanor slipped the band onto her thumb, the only finger it would fit, and looked out at the now empty forest edge. "I don't know, but I think Nathan is still here somehow, still watching over this place, over us." Olivia might have dismissed such a claim as the wishful thinking of a grieving widow, but after everything they'd witnessed, the bears at the funeral, the pine cone with Nathan's shirt fragment, and now this impossible return of his wedding ring, she found herself nodding slowly. "Let's go inside and warm up," she said gently. "Then you can tell me more about what Nathan knew about the ravens, about all of it." As they turned to go inside, Melody suddenly twisted in her mother's arms, pointing back toward the forest with an insistent sound. Both women turned to look, but saw only snow-covered trees and gathering shadows. "What is it, little one?" Olivia asked, following her daughter's unwavering gaze. But Melody simply smiled. a knowing look far too ancient for her infant face, before settling back against her mother's chest with a contented sigh. Spring came to Pinewood Valley in a rush of melting snow and emerald buds. The forest awakened from its winter dormancy, filled once more with the sounds of birds and the rustling of new life. 6 months had passed since Nathan's death, and while grief still visited Eleanor in quiet moments, it had softened into something she could carry without being crushed by its weight. The impossible return of Nathan's wedding ring had changed something fundamental in her understanding of life and death, of the connections that bind all living things. She wore it now on a chain around her neck, a tangible reminder of mysteries beyond human comprehension. On a bright April morning, Eleanor arrived at Olivia's home on the other side of the valley, a large envelope tucked under her arm. Melody, now nearly 1 year old, greeted her with excited babbles from her playpen in the living room. "Look who's standing up all by herself!" Eleanor exclaimed, setting down her envelope to scoop up the baby. Melody had changed dramatically over the winter months. Her fine hair had grown thicker. Her face had lost some of its infant roundness, and her eyes, Nathan's eyes, seemed to take in everything with unusual awareness. "She'll be walking any day now," Olivia said with a mixture of pride and weariness. "She's already climbing out of her crib. I don't know what I'm going to do when she's fully mobile." Eleanor bounced Melody gently, breathing in the sweet baby scent of her hair. "I have news," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And a proposition?" Olivia raised an eyebrow, gesturing for Eleanor to sit. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous," Eleanor assured her, settling onto the couch with Melody on her lap. "Just significant." She took a deep breath. "I've decided to finish what Nathan started. I'm going to continue his conservation work." Olivia blinked in surprise. Before his death, Nathan had been developing a proposal for expanded wildlife corridors throughout the valley, connecting existing sanctuaries to allow animals greater freedom of movement. It had been a complex project involving multiple agencies, landowners, and conservation groups. "That's wow," Olivia said. "That's a huge undertaking. What about your teaching?" Eleanor had been on extended leave from her position as an elementary school art teacher since Nathan's death. "I'm not going back," she said simply. "At least not full-time. I've been offered a part-time position with the Wildlife Conservation Society. They want me to coordinate the community outreach aspect of Nathan's project." She reached for the envelope she'd brought and pulled out several glossy brochures. "This is what I've been working on for the past 2 months." The brochures featured beautiful photographs of the valley's wildlife, including, Olivia noted with a start, a striking image of a mother bear and 2 cubs at the forest's edge, sunlight catching in their fur. The title read, "The Nathan Reed Memorial Wildlife Corridor, Connecting Creatures, Communities, and Conservation." "Oh, Eleanor," Olivia breathed, leafing through the materials. "This is incredible. But how did you get this photo? It looks just like—" "It is," Eleanor confirmed. "It's our bear family. Samuel Thorne helped me set up a wildlife camera near the property edge. They visit regularly now, always at dusk, always stopping at the same spot near Nathan's memorial tree." Melody, growing restless, reached for the colorful brochures. Eleanor gently redirected her attention to a soft toy nearby. The Conservation Society was amazed by the consistency of their visits. Eleanor continued, "Apparently, it's quite unusual for bears to establish such predictable patterns, especially around human habitations. Samuel says it defies conventional wildlife behavior models." "I'm not surprised," Olivia said dryly. "Nothing about those bears has been conventional from the start." Eleanor laughed. a genuine sound that had been rare in the months following Nathan's death. True enough, but it's given the project unexpected momentum. People are captivated by the story. The bear who came to a funeral, who keeps returning as if maintaining a connection with the human who once saved her cub. "Is that why you're on the local news next week?" Olivia asked, pointing to a small announcement in one of the brochures. Eleanor nodded. "State television, actually. They're doing a special feature on human-wildlife relationships, but that's not the proposition part of my news." She took a deep breath. "I want to build a small visitor center at the edge of our property, where it borders the forest. A place where people can learn about the Corridor Project, about Nathan's work, about the bears." Olivia's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious. There's more," Eleanor continued, her eyes bright with purpose. "I want you and Melody to come live with me. The cabin's too big for just me, and your apartment is getting too small for a growing toddler. Plus," she hesitated, then pushed forward, "I think it's important for Melody to grow up close to the forest, close to her connection with the bears." The request hung in the air between them, weighty with implication. Olivia studied her sister-in-law's face, seeing the mixture of hope and hesitation there. "You really believe there's a special connection, don't you?" she asked quietly. "Between Melody and the bears?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "I do. I can't explain it rationally, but after everything we've witnessed, yes, I believe there's something extraordinary happening. Something Nathan would have understood instinctively." Melody chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, pointing toward the window with the same insistence they had come to recognize. Both women turned to look, but saw only the neighbor's cat sauntering across the lawn. "She does that all the time now," Olivia said thoughtfully. "Points at things I can't see, laughs at empty corners of the room. The pediatrician says it's normal developmental behavior, but sometimes I wonder—" Eleanor leaned forward. "Wonder what?" Olivia hesitated, then sighed. "If she's seeing things we can't. Nathan used to talk about how children are more attuned to the natural world, more open to possibilities adults have learned to dismiss." She shook her head ruefully. "Listen to me. I sound like I'm losing my mind." "Not to me," Eleanor said firmly. "Not after everything we've experienced." They lapsed into thoughtful silence, broken only by Melody's contented babbling as she played with a stuffed bear, her favorite toy since Christmas. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said finally. "Something I haven't told anyone." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch, the kind Nathan had used to collect plant specimens during his forest surveys. Olivia watched curiously as Eleanor carefully untied the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. A small pile of what appeared to be ordinary soil lay there, dark and slightly damp. "What is that?" Olivia asked. "Dirt from Nathan's grave," Eleanor said simply. "I collected it the day after the raven brought his ring. I don't know why exactly, it just felt important." She held out her hand so Olivia could see the soil more clearly. At first glance it appeared ordinary, but as Olivia looked closer, she noticed tiny green shoots emerging from the dark earth, seedlings so small they were barely visible. "Are those plants?" she asked, leaning closer. Eleanor nodded, a strange mixture of wonder and certainty on her face. "Berry bushes, the same kind Nathan used to leave for the bears. I didn't plant them, they just started growing, right in the palm of my hand." Olivia felt a chill run up her spine. "That's not possible." "I know," Eleanor agreed. "But neither is a bear attending a funeral, or a raven returning a buried wedding ring." She carefully returned the soil and its impossible seedlings to the pouch. "I'm going to plant them around the memorial tree this afternoon. It feels right somehow. Melody reached for the pouch, her small face suddenly serious. Eleanor hesitated, then held it out to her. The baby patted it gently, then looked up at her aunt with an expression so knowing, so adult, that both women felt the hair rise on the backs of their necks. "I'll think about your offer," Olivia said finally, taking Melody back into her arms. "About moving in with you. It's a big change." Eleanor nodded, resealing the pouch and returning it to her pocket. "No pressure, but know that the invitation stands whenever you're ready." As Eleanor prepared to leave, Melody became suddenly agitated, struggling against her mother's hold and pointing insistently toward the door. "I think she wants to come with me," Eleanor said, surprised by the baby's unusual behavior. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "Would you mind taking her for a bit? I have some work to catch up on, and she's been restless all morning." "I'd love to," Eleanor replied, her face lighting up. "I was planning to go to the memorial tree to plant these seedlings. I think she'd enjoy the fresh air." And so, 20 minutes later, Eleanor walked along the forest path that led to Nathan's memorial tree, Melody securely fastened in a baby carrier against her chest. The infant was alert and engaged, her small hands reaching out to touch passing leaves and branches with evident delight. "You're just like your uncle," Eleanor told her, ducking beneath a low-hanging branch. He could never walk this path without stopping to examine every interesting leaf or track. Melody babbled in response, a complicated series of sounds that almost seemed to follow the cadence of conversation. Her eyes, so like Nathan's, took in everything. The dappled sunlight through the canopy, the flash of a cardinal's wing, the quick scurrying of a squirrel up a nearby trunk. When they reached the memorial tree, Eleanor was pleased to see how much it had grown since its planting. New leaves adorned its branches, vibrant with spring's energy. The stone marker at its base remained steadfast, though forest moss had begun to creep across its surface, softening the carved letters of Nathan's name. "Here we are, little one," Eleanor said, carefully unfastening the baby carrier and setting Melody on a blanket she spread over the soft grass. "This is your uncle's special place." Melody sat up straight, looking around with unusually focused attention for a child her age. Her gaze lingered on the tree, then moved to the forest beyond, as if seeking something or someone. Eleanor knelt beside the memorial stone and removed the leather pouch from her pocket. As she began to dig small holes for the seedlings, she spoke softly to Melody, telling her stories about Nathan. His kindness, his love for the forest, his excitement about becoming an uncle. "He would have adored you," she said, gently transferring the tiny sprouts to their new home in the soil. "He would have taught you the name of every tree, every bird, every star." Melody watched the planting process with rapt attention, occasionally reaching out as if to help. Eleanor smiled, guiding the tiny fingers to pat the soil gently around one of the seedlings. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels to survey their work. "Now, they can grow strong and tall, just like your uncle wanted, and someday they'll make berries for the bears." As if summoned by her words, a twig snapped in the forest beyond the clearing. Eleanor froze, instinctively moving closer to Melody. Years of living alongside wilderness had taught most valley residents to be cautious around wildlife, especially with a child present. But Melody showed no fear. Instead, she let out a delighted coo, bouncing on her blanket and pointing toward the sound with unmistakable recognition. Slowly, majestically, the mother bear emerged from the trees. She was alone this time, without her cubs, her massive form silhouetted against the deeper shadows of the forest. She paused at the edge of the clearing, her nose raised to test the air. Eleanor remained perfectly still, one hand resting protectively near Melody. But fear was not what filled her in that moment. Rather, a strange sense of rightness, of a circle completing itself. "Hello, old friend," she said softly, echoing the greeting she had used throughout the winter months. The bear rumbled low in her throat, a sound not of threat but of acknowledgement. Her dark eyes moved from Eleanor to Melody, lingering on the child with evident interest. To Eleanor's amazement, Melody raised her small hand in what could only be described as a greeting, babbling excitedly as if conversing with an old friend. The bear took a few steps into the clearing, moving with surprising delicacy for such a large creature. Eleanor tensed slightly but remained calm, trusting the connection that had developed over the past months. When the bear was about 15 feet away, she stopped, lowering her massive head to examine the newly planted seedlings. Her nostrils flared as she caught their scent, and she made another rumbling sound deep in her chest. "They're berry bushes," Eleanor explained, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to a bear as if she could understand. "The same kind Nathan used to leave for you." The bear raised her head, meeting Eleanor's gaze with that same uncanny intelligence that had marked their previous encounters. Then, to Eleanor's astonishment, the massive creature lowered herself to the ground in a lying position, her head resting on her front paws, a posture of complete relaxation. Melody let out a peal of delighted laughter, clapping her hands. The sound echoed through the clearing, bright and joyful against the backdrop of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. For nearly an hour they remained in this extraordinary tableau, a young widow, an infant child, and a wild bear, sharing a silent communion beside a memorial tree at the forest's edge. No words were necessary, no explanations required. In that sacred space, the boundaries between human and animal, between life and death, between known and unknown, seemed as permeable as morning mist. When the bear finally rose and retreated into the forest, disappearing as silently as she had come, Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks, not of grief this time, but of wonder, of gratitude. "Time to go home, little one," she said, gathering Melody into her arms. The baby yawned, suddenly tired after the excitement, and nestled against her aunt's shoulder. As they made their way back along the forest path, Eleanor felt a certainty settling into her bones. Nathan was gone, yet not gone. His spirit lived on. In the forest he had protected, in the animals he had saved, in the child who carried his blood and, it seemed, his extraordinary connection to the natural world. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be skeptics to convince, bureaucracies to navigate, funding to secure. But, with the memory of that peaceful hour in the clearing to sustain her, Eleanor knew she could face whatever challenges arose. And she knew, with a certainty that transcended rational thought, that Olivia and Melody would join her in the cabin at the forest's edge. That, together, they would continue Nathan's work, honoring his memory by protecting the wilderness he had loved and the mysterious, beautiful connections that bound all living things. As if confirming her thoughts, Melody stirred against her shoulder, one small hand reaching up to touch the wedding ring that hung around Eleanor's neck. The simple gold band caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, gleaming with a promise that extended beyond death, beyond understanding, into the realm of pure faith. Summer arrived with a vigor that transformed Pinewood Valley into a lush paradise. The forest canopy thickened, providing welcome shade against the climbing temperatures, while wildflowers carpeted the meadows in explosions of color. For the residents of Eleanor's cabin, now including Olivia and Melody, who had moved in during the early days of June, life had developed a new rhythm, one attuned to both human schedules and the wilder patterns of the surrounding forest. Melody had taken her first steps on the cabin's wide porch, tottering from her mother's arms to Eleanor's outstretched hands with a determination that made both women laugh through their tears. Now, at 13 months old, she was everywhere at once, exploring her expanded world with fearless curiosity. "She's just like Nathan," Olivia remarked one evening as they watched Melody examining a line of ants on the porch steps with intense concentration. He never could pass by the smallest creature without stopping to observe it. Eleanor nodded, a fond smile softening her features. "Remember how he used to come to dinner with his pockets full of interesting rocks or unusually shaped leaves? Your mother never knew what she'd find in the laundry." The memory brought comfortable laughter rather than pain, a sign of healing that Eleanor treasured. More and more, they could speak of Nathan with joy rather than sorrow, celebrating what he had been rather than mourning what they had lost. The construction of the visitor center had begun at the edge of the property, a modest structure designed to blend harmoniously with its surroundings. Local timber formed its bones, while large windows would eventually frame views of the forest beyond. Eleanor's artwork, detailed illustrations of local wildlife and their habitats, would adorn the walls, alongside educational displays about Nathan's conservation work. "Miss Eleanor, Miss Eleanor," the excited voice of Tyler Jenkins, a local teenager who had volunteered to help with the visitor center, broke into their peaceful evening. The gangly boy was running up the path from the construction site, waving something in his hand. "You've got to see this." Eleanor rose from her chair, concern mixing with curiosity. "What is it, Tyler?" The boy skidded to a stop on the porch, breathing hard from his sprint. "We found something when we were digging the foundation for the east wall." He held out his hand, revealing a small object caked with dirt. "Mr. Hoffman thought you should see it right away." Eleanor took the item, using her thumb to carefully brush away the soil. As the dirt fell away, she gasped, nearly dropping the object in shock. "What is it?" Olivia asked, picking up Melody, who had begun to crawl toward the steps with determined intent. Eleanor held up the object so Olivia could see, a pocket watch, its silver case tarnished but still intact, its chain broken at one end as if it had been yanked away suddenly. "It's Nathan's," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The one his grandfather gave him for his 18th birthday. He was wearing it the day of the accident." Her hands trembled as she carefully opened the case, revealing the delicate mechanism inside, frozen at 3:47. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, aware that he had delivered something significant but not understanding the full implications. "Mr. Hoffman said it was weird to find a watch that nice buried out there. Said it must have been lost recently." Eleanor exchanged a look with Olivia, both women thinking the same impossible thought. First the wedding ring, now this. Another item that should have been buried with Nathan, somehow returned to them. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Tyler," Eleanor said, recovering her composure. "Please tell Mr. Hoffman I appreciate his thoughtfulness." The boy nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else, Miss Eleanor. When we found the watch, there were tracks." Eleanor's attention sharpened. "What kind of tracks?" "Bear tracks," Tyler said, his eyes wide with excitement. "Big ones, like a full-grown female. Mr. Hoffman said they weren't there yesterday evening when we finished work, and they were right around where we found the watch, like the bear had been digging." After Tyler departed, promising to return early the next morning to continue his volunteer work, Eleanor and Olivia sat in stunned silence. The pocket watch lay on the small table between them, its tarnished surface gleaming dully in the evening light. "This isn't possible," Olivia said finally, her logical mind struggling against the evidence before her eyes. First the ring, now the watch. These were buried with him, Eleanor. I saw them place the watch in his pocket myself. Eleanor ran her fingers over the watch's engraved surface, feeling the worn spots where Nathan's thumb had repeatedly rubbed during his lifetime. And yet, here it is. But how? Olivia pressed, bouncing Melody gently as the toddler began to fuss. Are we supposed to believe the bears are, what, digging up Nathan's grave? The idea was too disturbing to contemplate, yet what other explanation could there be? Eleanor shook her head, placing the watch carefully back on the table. I don't know, but I think we need to visit the cemetery tomorrow to make sure everything is as it should be. Melody, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly let out an excited babble, reaching toward the forest with familiar insistence. Both women turned to look, expecting to see their bear family at the tree line. Instead, they saw a raven. Unusually large, its feathers gleaming blue-black in the fading light. It sat on a low branch at the forest's edge, watching them with evident intelligence. Then, as if satisfied by what it had observed, it spread its impressive wings and launched into flight, disappearing over the treetops with a single harsh call. That's the same raven, Eleanor said with quiet certainty. The one that brought the ring in winter. Olivia didn't argue, though 6 months earlier she might have dismissed such a claim as impossible to verify. Too many inexplicable events had transpired for her to cling to rigid skepticism. Tomorrow, she agreed, rising from her chair with Melody in her arms. We'll go to the cemetery tomorrow and see what we can find. That night, a powerful summer storm swept through the valley, bringing torrential rain and spectacular lightning displays that illuminated the forest in stark, momentary tableaus. The newly constructed walls of the visitor center stood firm against the onslaught, but the rain washed away any tracks that might have provided further clues about the mysterious appearance of Nathan's watch. Dawn brought clear skies and the fresh, clean scent of rain-washed earth. After an early breakfast, Eleanor and Olivia prepared for their visit to the cemetery, strapping Melody securely into her car seat for the drive into town. Should we tell someone? Olivia asked as they wound down the mountain road that led from the cabin to Pinewood's main street. About the ring and the watch, I mean. Samuel Thorne, maybe, or Pastor William.